Okay, so I believe this should be part 7 of the Schumacher CAT 3000 restoration series, and from last time I got to the point where I was supposed to install the diffs on the front and rear, and I had mentioned that I wanted to take the diffs apart and clean them out, even though they felt pretty good. I had started doing the front diff here, and I was actually making a video for that, but the problem was there's this little C-clip here that apparently sort of holds in or helps to house the thrust bearing assembly into the diff halve on this side, and you need to use little tweezers in these little holes here on this C-ring or C-clip, and it's a real pain to try to remove this thing because the material that they use for that clip is a little on the thick side, so there's a lot of tension in what is effectively a spring. And tweezers that have a sharp enough edge to get into those two holes, you're going to bend the tweezer edges to actually try to bend that C-clip and unseat it from the housing, this sort of inner ring here inside of the diff halve. So I just wasted too much time in that video trying to find a way to get that freaking thing out, and I didn't want you guys to get essentially bored by looking at that. So I got that out of the way, and I tried to clean up at least some of this diff halve here. There was some orange gunk on the inside of this diff outdrive here. It was like kind of dry. I don't know if it was some kind of lubricant that was meant to work with this blade, right? What this here is called is a blade. So it attaches to your dog bone pins, and this mates to the diff outdrive like this. If I can even get it to work with me here, like this. So I don't know if it was meant to be some kind of lubricant here as this thing slides in and out as the suspension moves around, or what it was for. But I figured I'd try to clean some of that out anyway. So that being said, this diff is actually in pretty good shape. The diff rings are good. There's no grooving in the diff rings, so we can get back to putting this back together. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use associated diff grease and diff lube because it's just what I have lying around. I can go and get my Kyosho diff grease, but really it's not a big deal, I don't think. So here's what we're going to do. This assembly, so it goes on the thrust bolt, and the thrust bolt goes in here, and the way they make that seam, so you might not be able to see it, but inside, so basically this whole thing, when you assemble it, you put it in this way, into the diff halve. And then there's a little lip on the inside of the housing there that holds actually this goes this way, sorry. Just to be more accurate about what's going on. And this plate here, for this thrust bearing, that gets caught by that little sort of ring on the inside, so it keeps it from going through to the outside of the diff halve. And then you hold that all in place with that little C-ring on the top here. It's a cute design, and I suspect that's meant to protect the thrust bearing from getting dirty, is as you get dirt inside this thrust bearing, it really messes up the operation, like it stops being nice and smooth. But servicing it is a real pain, because removing that little C-clip is just a royal pain in the ass. Most other ball diffs do not assemble that way. You have just the thrust bearing here and not these little spring washers, and you would slide it in from this side, and then it would go through the diff and through this side, and then you have your a spring or a set of spring washers like this on this side of the diff halve, or the diff rather, and then this bolt here, that this nut that the thrust bolt screws into. That's a more conventional ball diff assembly, which is actually a lot easier to do. The only issue there is when you do that, now this thrust bearing is essentially on the outside of this diff halve, and so it's going to be more exposed to dirt. Now if it's more exposed to dirt, you're going to have to rebuild it more often. So some people like Kyosho, they get around that problem by just making a little cloth or felt uh, kind of spacer. It's just a little circular, thing that you just shove in here, and it covers the thrust bolt. So you tighten down your thrust bolt, and then you shove that little cover in, and that's a natural filter. It's going to keep dirt from getting in. So you maintain the ability to have a ball diff assembly that's easy to put together and service. You just got to take that tiny little felt thing out, and then you get to do, you get to adjust the diff or take it apart. This thing is a goddamn C-clip. I hate these things. Hate them. So anyway, that's enough ranting. Let's just get straight to it. These spring washers have to go in a certain order, so I'm going to try to keep them in the appropriate ordering there. And then this, actually, that goes on the bottom. So these kinds of thrust bearings are really easy because they're already pre-made, although it looks like this one dropped a ball. See, there's one missing ball from that. Now maybe that was my fault, I don't know. But that's not too big a deal. We have plenty of diff parts. Let's see, there's not in here, but do have in here. Sorry, not that one. Other one. Yep, here we go. So we have thrust bearing in there. And then I think I got plenty of thrust bearings. So I'm not too worried about not having them. It's just if I can find one in an open package so I don't have to break open a brand new one, I would rather do that. Just make things a little bit easier. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like I'm just going to use the one that's in here, which is fine. Well, there's at least one in here. There might be, yeah, there's a couple of others. Okay. Or, it looks like I see one. It is also missing, yeah, this one's missing balls too. So that means, in fact, I could just take a ball from that one and put it in this one. Let's see, I'll take this off. Now some people might tell you, not to mix diff balls because, they all, you have a set of diff balls that you use to build a diff, and they're all going to essentially wear together. And so if you have, 8 diff balls that go into a thrust bearing, boop, and you lose one and you pull a, oop, that must be this one here. Alright, well, whatever. And you lose one, and now you're down to 7, and then you pull a brand new diff ball from somewhere else and you add it to that set, then that diff ball is going to have a different amount of wear. And so then your diff might not feel as smooth or as consistent because you are technically using parts with different amounts of wear to build your thrust bearing. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, so let's check this. This looks okay. So, let's see, this one, yeah, this has some on it. I kind of prefer the sort of other style of thrust bearings, which is what you see on like the Associateds and the Kyoshos and the Yokomos, where you essentially, you put some black grease on this plate and you manually take these balls one by one and you put them on the plate here, and then you put the other plate on, and then that's it. I guess I've just done it so many times, to me it's really easy. These little housings here, they're fine. I don't have any fundamental issue with them. And for most people it's probably easier. But, yeah, you know what? I really don't have anything to complain about with these housings. They're perfectly fine. The only thing is you do have to make sure that those balls are seated in those little openings in that housing. If they come out, you got to put them back in. when you build the thrust bearing yourself, without that little housing there, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to make sure all the thrust balls are on the plate, and then they just kind of set themselves as you're tightening everything down. So okay, you put this one on this side. You got to make sure you put the grooved side down. That's the other thing with these. That's really why I don't like them as much. Those thrust plates are pre-grooved. And I talked in another video about ball diffs and how I prefer to build them. And I like to have fresh plates that have no grooves, and I'm not the kind of person that breaks in the ball diff, you know, trying to do something, how do I put this? A lot of people try to break in their ball diff and groove the plates. I don't like that. In, out. Okay, yeah, so I got this right. To put these guys on. The washers go in a certain arrangement, so making sure they're aligned correctly. Yeah, I just run the ball diff perfectly stock, and then as it wears in, as you run the car more, then those plates will naturally groove on their own. You don't need to force that, because as you do, you wear it out. And as you wear it out, you don't get as much life out of the diff. Okay, so now we're going to need one of these little fuckers. I hate these things. Pardon my language, but I really don't like these clips. Alright, so I'm going to take this. And I'm just going to do one tonight because it's actually pretty late. And I have to get to bed. And then next time I'll do the other diff. Or maybe I mean, it's the same exact diff, so if I just do one, and then I rebuild the other one on my own time, then I can start the next video after that one's done. That's probably perfectly fine as well. Alright, so now the fun part. I have to put that in. God, I hate this. Alright. How do you want to do this? Slot that in. Alright, let's get the tweezers. Even though it's probably going to break the tweezers. Let's see. You know what? I don't even think I need the thrust bolt here. I can just kind of push that through. That's not going to do anything. Everything here is just going to sit in this housing. As long as I don't flip it over, it's fine. I gotta squeeze this thing down without breaking it. Let's see, is there a simpler way that I can like kind of put, no. There's a little groove on the inside there where this thing has to sit. It's got to be perfect. If you don't nail it, then you got to start over. So this is probably going to be the most boring part of the video, watching me fumble around and screw this thing up until it actually seats. But I would say this is this is an example, yet another example, by the way, of Schumacher completely over-engineering something. You know, it's a nice solution in theory, but in practice, you know, this is not particularly friendly to you know, someone who's trying to actually service the diff. Associated diffs are way, way, way easier to do. Okay, god damn it. Here we go. I'm gonna get this in this hole and this in this hole. Alright. See? That doesn't work because it has to sit in that little groove right there. And this washer here, this clip, is kind of thick. So these tweezers are probably not even strong enough to actually grab those two holes and allow me to squeeze it down to compress that clip and seat it into that groove there. I wonder if maybe I can do this by hand. Oh yeah. Actually, that works a little better. Okay. Okay, now we're kind of getting somewhere. If I can just kind of brute force it like an idiot. Hey, look at that. Bing! Alright, so I really don't even need tweezers. And these are all bent up anyway. See, manuals might tell you that you need tweezers for that part of the process, but then you end up just destroying the tweezer tips. Unless, I don't know, I haven't found a set of tweezers that can withstand that kind of mechanical strain. So, anyway. And then there's a bearing that goes right on top here. Boop. Okay. So that's part one, and then we have to put, let's see. When you build a ball diff with diff rings that don't lock against the housing, you have to grease both sides of the diff ring. Because the diff ring isn't locking against the housing, it by design can slide against the housing like this. So you want to make sure you grease both sides. And this side here is going to interface with diff balls that go in this guy. So we're going to plop these back in. Oh yeah, it's one of these. Alright, so the way you deal with that, and that little spacer, it doesn't matter which side it goes on. I guess not. Hold on a second. That's going to go on that. Yeah, alright. It's going to go this way, it looks like. And then we just plop the balls in. Some diff pulleys or diff gears, they're molded in such a way so that you put the balls in on one side, and then there's just like a little bit of plastic on the other side that sort of holds those diff balls in place, so that you don't have to do it like this, where you're putting the diff over the diff half and relying on the diff ring to hold the diff balls as you're trying to assemble the other half of the diff. Oh, god damn it. Alright, so we'll just... you know what? I'll put it there. I hope it doesn't fall apart. And so we'll do this side, like so. That's pretty clean. I don't have to clean that. That's good. Okay. Good. And I already wiped this down. So we're good there. And then I'll put grease on this side now. And now we have almost a happy little diff. Alright, come on. I'm just going to slot this through on this side. And then this diff nut goes on this side. Alright, let's see if this does the trick here. Oops, let me clean that out. Okay. Alright, so you can feel it tightening a little bit. You don't want to crank it down all the way. If you crank it down all the way and then you back off to get the appropriate setting, you're going to pre-compress the diff balls, and you'll also compress the diff plates, and so you won't get smooth diff action if you have these little divots in the diff plates because you crank down on it with some static setting. Then as the diff rotates and the balls are going to go in and out of those grooves, the diff's going to feel crunchy. So once you start to feel it tighten up, you just go a little bit at a time, a little more and a little more, right? You just have some patience and keep going until it locks, or it's almost locked, and then you back off a little bit, right? Just going to take this and slot it in here and give me a little bit more torque. Okay, so I think that's probably close to full lock. Oh no, there's a bit more. Yeah, that I can feel getting tight. So we're going to back off a little bit, maybe about a 1/16 of a turn or so. So just know exactly where your fingers are, and then, you know, quarter turn, we'll go from here to here. So we'll do about a half that. Yeah, it's firm, but not excessively tight. Okay, good. Then we're going to put these little things on here. These are like pulley guides. So when the belt, or these are belt guides rather. So when the belt runs up against this, it doesn't skip off the sides. Let's see. How do these bearings feel? Not bad. Not bad. Just put a little bit of oil in them. Boop, 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 boop. Flip them over. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Good. And this is for, yeah, this should be for the front. All right. So, front diff is done. And the thing with this manual, the diff installation is on page 8. The diff build is on page 14. It's completely disorganized. So, okay. Right, because last time we were on page 7. Yeah, alright. So I'm just going to plop this in here. And let's see. Is there a particular direction I should put it in? Because normally, like where the thrust bolt is, that goes on, it's meant to go on a particular side of the car. And, alright. The manual here doesn't tell you. This is actually not a very good manual at all. But maybe in the 3D image here, okay, so this is saying the thrust bolt is going to go on the left side of the chassis for the front diff, and then for the rear diff, doesn't say. But presumably, well, usually they go on opposite sides. So if it's on the left side for the front of the car, usually it'll be on the right side for the rear of the car. But yeah, that doesn't specify, which is wonderful. Alright, so we'll just put it in here like this. Look at that. Alright, and then we want to put the top housing down. Oh, see, that's kind of interesting. Let's see, 2 screws there, top bulkhead. So basically, the front and rear gearboxes are kind of coupled. Like if I want to take the front diff out, I have to take off the entire upper deck unless you can bend it enough to just take this off. But like when you're putting it together, essentially, you know, like when I put this diff in, I can't put the top transmission housing on and tighten that down and secure it on its own, right? It just sits there, and you got to wait until you also do the rear diff, and that's going to sit there, and then everything is fastened in through the top deck. So that is just going to sit there until I do the rear diff. And by the way, before I do the rear diff, I got to put the rear belt on anyway. So, alright, I'm going to leave that here, and later on I'll come back and do the rear diff and put that on, and we'll do the top deck, and that'll be pretty good progress. And until then, thanks for watching.